Hello, everyone, and welcome to Making the Rounds. Well, technically, we're using the overlay of Making the Rounds, but Emily is not here, so it isn't really making the rounds without her. However, I have a very nice Emily substitute who's here to talk about regions that you probably don't pay that much attention to, thus making him a great Emily substitute. But if you are aware, if you remember EVOS from MSI, he was indeed the coach of EVOS while they attended. He is still the coach of EVOS, so he is particularly familiar with the VCS region from which Phong Buffalo hail, but also has covered the LMS or followed the LMS quite extensively in some capacity. Is there anything important I'm leaving out?
Just to make a quick clarification, so most people would know EVOS and the stage coach, which is Violet.
Mm-hmm.
Well, because I don't speak very good Vietnamese, so you wouldn't see me as much if you do watch the VCS. But I'm still there, and if you watch like the behind the scenes content, you'll see me in those videos.
Yes, but today we are here to talk about kind of, unfortunately, the halfway through the first stage of group stage. So we have followed the first round of the round robin for Group A, B, C, and D. And since today you had every single LMS team play plus Fangbu Buffalo, I thought this would be a really good day for Jensen to come on and talk a little bit about that and perhaps the mid laner of Cloud9. No, not really. Unrelated. But first of all, let's talk a little bit about Fongbu Buffalo in particular, since that's probably the team you're going to be the most familiar with. But from your perspective, what is really the big highlight, the big strength of Fongbu Buffalo?
So, if you want the Reddit response, I'm here to confirm that Phong Buffalo will make top four of Worlds. No, I'm not gonna do that. Um, I'm gonna be realistic about this. Phong Buffalo and the Vietnamese region as a whole, we are not exactly there yet. If we are talking about being on par with the major regions, in terms of strengths, I think that this is a tough group for them. Uh, from what I know, and the conversations that I had with the coach Ren, he says that Africa Freaks is actually a team that he drew a lot of inspiration from, that he spends a lot of time watching and trying to study the way that they play. And there is one team that's consistently beaten the LMS. Sorry, there's one team that's consistently beaten the VCS region, even back in the day when Gam was like stealing games off everybody, and that has been the LMS region. So when you put Africa Freaks, you put Flash Wolves in the group, and then they draw Buffalo as the third team in the group. It's kind of like, yeah, we don't really think, or at least from my perspective, I don't really think that Phong Buffalo will be making it out of Group A. And then G2 comes in. When G2 was drawn into the group, from the way that G2 had been playing during the planes and from the way Fengfu plays, I thought that Fengfu might actually be able to take two games of G2 and go 2-4 in the group itself. Sorry, that didn't answer your question. So let's move on to what the highlights of the team. It's a little bit difficult to say, but I'm going to split the way that they play. It's actually dependent on which side they're on. So on red side, they actually prefer to draft very scaling kind of champions, which is their comfort picks. And we saw that exactly in today's game against Africa, where it's actually these are all the comfort picks: Big Coral on Asriel, Pellet on Rakan. The casters were talking about him being known for Tamkench, but in the VCS when we play against Pellet, it's always Pellet and Rakan. Those are the two things that people associate to Zeros on the carry champion. That didn't work out too well, and Meliodas on Grace or Kindred. The only player who didn't get the comfort champion of sorts, which was now who will probably be known for the Vel'Koz as of late, which he played against G2 and got the solo kill on the Yankos. But he played at the Galio today, and I think that they were kind of outmatched in that game against Africa. The highlights, I think the highlights have yet to come. Is when we go to the second round and then they have more blue side games. Is when you start to see a little bit more of the planned tactics coming through from Fengbu. Everyone compares them. Okay, this is YG from the previous year. A big part of the roster has changed, and this is a team that's developed a lot much more as compared to young generation, which we saw at Worlds last year as well. Now, this team are they GAM, which is super cheesy? Not exactly, but they're not exactly incapable of cheese as well. And it's on blue side where they might pull out some special tactics. I do know that they play a very interesting Karma Nocturne strategy. And with all this Nocturne popping up in the meta, I'm not surprised if we do see that happen as we move forward.
Okay, thank you for that. So would you say that the at least like kind of the cursory explanation then of Zeros being like the super highlight player and Null being also very strong, but the rest of the roster not standing up as much? Would you say that that's accurate, or are we kind of overlooking Big Koro and Meliodas, I suppose, and then Palette a little bit?
I think that your roster for Fengwu is strong across the board in terms of like individual
Okay.
mechanics. Is anybody a liability on this team? Nobody is a liability in the lane, but I do feel that Meliodas is very questionable, especially when it comes to the champions that he can play. He plays Graves, he plays Kindred, and that's about it. When we see him play other things, he just becomes the second top. He becomes like the support for Zeros in the top lane, and that's what they do on raid side, especially when they don't get his three champions, Grace, Kindred, as well as Nocturne. If he doesn't have access to these champions, and in fact, his Nocturne is also not really that good itself. It's just that they do this very crazy strategy, which is something that we I'm hoping we will get to see as we move forward. Uh, Big Coral and Palette, they did well on YG last year. They've shown that they are a strong bot lane. They did pretty well against Charnan in the match against G2. Charnan and Wadid when they played against G2. So I wouldn't say that it's just now and Zeros. And in fact, um, when Zeros has entered the roster, we've actually seen Dao take a step back, and he's actually been playing a much more supportive role.
Okay. So I would say then my question is, do you feel like this is a team that relies on like cute strategy, or they just sort of do them because it's familiar, because it's comfortable, because it's something that they've practiced a lot? Or what's your stance on that kind of play?
So I wouldn't say that they're reliant on it, but that's how they problem solve
Okay.
around top lane centric teams, right? Top lane centric teams, they are teams that tend to do well on red side because you can counter pick for the top lane and you can guarantee that they're good matchup with the strongest second half of the draft for yourself. But when you play on blue side, you suddenly have this problem where you are not guaranteed the counter pick for top lane, and in fact, your opponent is allowed to counter pick that matchup. So they either have a winning lane, or at the worst case for them, they are able to get a matchup where they can just soak up all the pressure, and it's difficult for you to breach that lane itself. So this is where they are able to play a much more different style. And in fact, we see them do the Tamken Traveris as well, where they're able to play similar to the Korean teams, where they can draft a scaling comp even on blue side, and they sacrifice the mid and jungle priority early on for and they're able to attack either side of the map so that they're able to race you early and then make up for whatever losses they have and then reach the late game and win the team fight that way. At least on paper, that's the theory. But for those of you who are familiar with the Vietnamese region, you just see the team fights happen like all the time.
Yeah, yeah, of course. How would you compare them to other teams in their group? For example, Flash Wolves, which is a team that you feel comfortable talking a lot about compared to the other two.
Well, I did mention that they model a lot of their play after their Freaka freaks.
Okay.
So when we see and we compare the style of play to the Korean team. So let's talk a little bit about the meta that we're seeing at this World Championship,
Okay.
right? So there's teams like Flash Tools and RNG. What the term they use to describe it is that they play these polarized team compositions where they're going to pick a tank on one side of the map, and then they're going to have very clear, okay, the jungler is only going to focus on the bottom side of the map. Whereas teams like Africa, teams like and I think Phong falls into this
Fangbu.
category as well, yeah, where Buffalo, they would attack, they would have options to attack on either side of the map, so that if we do not win mid and jungle, we still can go to the other side of the map instead of having to, yep, I have a tank in the top lane and there's a tank against tank matchup. If I send my jungler, which is likely to be a bruiser, a Gragas or Olaf in this current meta, that I'm not getting the turret. I'm at most blowing a summon a spell. Whereas on the bottom side of the map, I'm losing the turret, I'm losing 2 kills, I'm losing the dragon.
Yeah, and I think G2 is another team, so this group kind of plays more towards the top side of the map in general, I would argue, except for Flash Wolves, who are a bit of an anomaly. Would you say that that is a good group for Fangbu to be in, or a bad group? Does that make their chances worse or better?
I think that it's a like you have to beat 2 out of the 4. You have to beat 2 out of 3 to advance, right? I
Right.
think G2 is a good matchup for them because of the way that they stylistically play and the way that Yangos has been playing. He's been playing like this very counter punching style, which I think is might be favorable for Fengwu if they can get the draft that they're looking for, if they can find the comfort picks. But I think for the Flash Wolves matchup, um, I think that they're coming in as the boogeyman. Flash Wolves and RNG, they're coming in as the boogeyman of this tournament. They're setting the meta. They're saying that this is how you play on this patch, and can you solve it? And I don't think Fengwu is of the mechanical skill, or if they are able to develop fast enough to be able to adapt and overcome what was a very devastating loss against Flash Wolves on the first day. And Africa, I saw that this might be the one scenario in which they make it out. They take 2 games of G2, and then they steal 1 game of Africa, and that might be the team that they have a chance to beat. But I don't really think that it will happen.
Okay.
Yeah, I have Flash Wolves topping the group, followed by Africa.
Okay. That makes
Exactly.
sense considering the current place that they are. It is an interesting group though because you have two 1-2 teams and two 2-1 teams. So I think that there's all sorts of configurations possible. Would you definitely say then in that case, in your mind, PvB have a better chance to get out of the group than G2 or not?
I actually think G2 has. I mean, of course, G2 is the one at the moment,
Yes, of
so things
course.
look good for them. But for me, when I made that assessment, it's kind of just based on what I saw in play-ins, based on what I knew about the teams.
Hmm.
But just the thing about G2, G2 is a team that's very good at learning, and it's a team that's good at advancing. So I'll cover this a little bit when we talk about Flash Rules. We can just talk about Flash Rules
Yes.
now as well.
Hmm.
But when I talked to Stick after MSI 2017, he said that their mistake was during IEM and during MSI itself. So they won the Flash Rules won the IEM, and then they went to MSI, and then they were playing. It was a very Flash Rules favorite meta, right? There's a tank in the top lane, and then you're playing Varus, Ashe, these kind of like bot lane centric things. Same thing, control mid jungle, attack bot lane. It's perfect for Flash Rules. So they crushed IEM, and then they went to MSI, and they said that their mistake was that they scrimmed too much to G2, and
Okay.
they let G2 learn how to play the meta, and G2 solved the meta and went one step ahead of that. And we know that G2 did make the finals of that MSI, whereas Flash Wolves they they kind of like were hyped up because of the IEM win. They came in and then they kind of like fell flat
It's kind of funny
during
that you
MSI
say
itself.
that because I think like at that IEM and stuff, G2 and Flash Wolves sort of become international rivals to a
Yeah,
degree, just because obviously you have that IEM final, you have G2 playing against Flash Wolves at MSI, you have them both kind of in an unfavorable position in the group stage of the Worlds last year, and now they're in the same group again together. So you could probably string together a pretty interesting story about those two teams. So uh, it's interesting to see them at the top of the group, and Flash Wolves having only lost to G2 at this point. So
and
we've. Oh, go ahead.
yeah, so I want to talk a little bit more about G2. So
Okay.
when I had them coming in, they were based on the strength of what they showed in planes. I had them at the bottom of the group, but now from what they're doing, they're learning, they're adapting, and at the moment, I'm not sure if they have adapted or were they just lucky in the sense that yeah, we have the Camille. Did they really figure it out? And it's like okay, we have the answers to the boogeyman. We know what Flash Wolves are trying to do. We know what RNG are trying to do. We saw the Gen G versus RNG game, and then the Camille top. These are the answers, and this is how we approach the meta. Or is this like yeah, we are kind of like out of options. Let's go back to comfort. Let's play to Wonder, who's a carry in the top lane, and then so happens that oh, this so happened to be the answer to what Flash was trying to do. Do you want to go into the Flash versus G2 game?
Yeah, I think it's definitely worth talking about that game because it's really interesting. Like from my perspective, there is people talk a lot about Hjarnan not having a very wide champion pool, but there are very set specific amount of champions that Wadid can play pretty effectively without there being an issue when they want to carry out their 1-3-1, and obviously Tom Kench is one of them. Camille, a question becomes like, what did G2 play when they don't have Camille? Because obviously they got their 2 wins with the Camille. And I feel like both Afrika and Flash Wolves made the mistake of not really having something that can answer the side lane pressure from the Camille. And so, like for me, the question becomes whether or not we'll see an adaptation from those two teams in the next round and sort of understand what G2 are doing more fully.
I'm actually very interested to see the rematch for this one. So, just my takeaway from the games today between Flashes and G2. Now, a lot of people are going to say that, oh yeah, Wonder deserves all the credit, but I really think that the real crux in this game. So, was at 7 minutes, where they get the kill onto Mujin in the river. Nocturne's level 6, they pop the ulti, Perks bamboozles Maple, and then they suddenly get this pick off onto the Karagas. They stick Scuttlecrab control, and all the setup that Flashes was doing before that, they got a kill onto the Tahm Kench earlier, they blew the Flash and the heal of the Jhin earlier as well, or was it the Flash and the TP of the Jhin earlier as well. Botlane had no summoner spells, and this was looking like a typical Flashes game. Control mid jungle and attack bot lane, and then suddenly Mujin dies, and then Jankos takes two Scar Crabs in a row. And from what was supposed to be right on time, where Flashers are able to get a dive off before 10 minutes, take the ball lane dart, and then rotate top, and then take the Rift Harrow, and they start to struggle.
Fair, because I've seen the EU teams have the most success when they're setting up their mid and then they're moving with their mid and jungle in that regard. Like they'll go to a side lane and they'll get someone ahead, and then at a point, any side trade that the enemy team wants to do, right? They have to basically trade to one side, whereas you can trade through top and mid or top and bottom if you're G2 in this particular case, and they end up slowly taking over the map this way. So for me, the way that the game starts working for teams, and this was true in the G2 game as well, is you have good control coming through mid jungle, and then they snowball whatever side of the game that they have. So I think that that's definitely a good apt sort of assessment of where the game went wrong for Flash Wolves. Do you think that this is something that they can fix, or was it just kind of a one-off problem?
I'm not sure, because this is something that I'm pretty sure that Flashers, as well as RNG, they'll be more than okay with giving the Camille over, and they're going to continue to run this Scion and then the carry strat where they just hit two items and the team fight take the Baron and end the game. But if we were to replay this matchup, or if I'm Flashers now and I'm reviewing this game, it's hard to tell exactly what went wrong without being able to hear the comms. Was it Maple? Did Maple not use its ultimate? Because the Gallo ultimate was available when the Nocturne engaged onto the Gragas. I think the darkness prevents you from using that, but there should have been a period. There definitely was a window where Maple could have participated in the fight as well. And I think Flash Shoes is more than okay with repeating that. Probably they say that, yeah, when we set up for this, Bolin needs to push out a little bit more, or change the parting in the approach to the river so that you don't walk back towards the Akali and you walk towards the ball lane instead, which has another heal over there and the Brom to cover you as well. So micro wise, they could probably look at it, and this is a very steak reply. They didn't pay enough attention to details. It says everything and it says nothing at the same time. But he says that all the time, and I think that this is the takeaway from that. We do the same thing. We play the exact same setup, and this time when the Nocturne outs you walk towards the right side of the map, towards your AD carry and your support, and that is that ties in with the way that Flash Wolves learns the game as well.
Yeah, I also think that if you talk about why that mistake was so important is again what I said. Like I think a lot of people will look at Flash Wolves comp and say that, oh, they have, a good scaling 3 item AD carry, they have a really big front line, things along those lines. But at the same time, you have on G2 two like big sideline threats where if Flash Wolves don't get the force they want, then all the early game setup doesn't really matter because they can't answer the side lanes. They can't really get the good team fights they want either. And I think that it just came to a point where they didn't have a way back into the game. And I've seen domestically what Flash Wolves will do is if the enemy has like a really good scaling or carry top laner or split pushing top laner, is that they'll have Maple play something like Rise that can also do something that as well, and then he'll have TP or he'll have TP on LeBlanc or something along those lines, and he'll be able to answer the split push as well. So I think just like an adjustment there so that they have more options if something goes wrong will also be helpful for Flash Wolves. And I still have Flash Wolves as getting out of the group over G2 in my mind. For me, the big question mark is Afrika, because I do think that just in terms of the adjustments that we saw with Afrika against Fongbu, it isn't just that Fongbu are like free elo in this group. I think it's very important to note that the way that Afrika went into this game, they just came out looking more prepared with the compositions that they had and everything else. Like as soon as they see the Camille Galio, they pick up things that are really hard to engage on because, Aurelia will ult your Swain will ult Tom Kench theoretically can ult or he can eat, and then you have the ability to counter engage with the Varus. You have a lot of options from the Afrika comp to deal with the enemy comp, which made it seem like that they were thinking a lot more about what Phong wanted to do as compared to the G2 and the Flash Wolves games, where I felt like they were a little bit more lost in general in terms of just the holisticness of what their composition was going to be and how they were playing out the game. And Mowgli had a really good read on the enemy team as well when he was able to say, okay, they only have really one lane they can play around, and as long as we're in a good position to counter that, then our bottom lane will win on its own. Things of that nature, I think, are good adjustments for Afrika, and I can still see Afrika getting out of the group above either Flash Wolves or G2, depending on how the second round goes. So
Yeah, that's something I think that we talk about setters and solvers, right? So Flash Wolves and RNG, they're kind of like settling the meta,
mm-hmm.
and then Afrika, they're known as the solvers, but that only really happens in the playoff stage and where you reach the best of 5 stage, where the Korean teams really start to hunker down and they process, they download all this data, and then they figure out, okay, this is what we need to do, and then they pull out the pocket pick that no one has seen before, like we saw, I think it was Misfortune in the 2016 Worlds, or even like how the meta continued to evolve in when whenever we reach the playoff stages of MSI or Worlds or wherever it is. But G2 is another team that's good at learning. So I think that Group A is going to be the testing, is going to be the petri dish of what the meta might shape out to be, because we have Flash Wolves, which is mini RNG. I think that RNG might have won the game today against G2, but that okay, we have the discussion later on.
for sure.
But this is just Group A is just so interesting because Flash who sets the meta, and then you have G2 who's trying to solve it, and then you have Afrika who is known for being able to solve things as well, and then there's Fengwu who will, I don't think they really changed things much. You stick to the styles, shenanigans on blue, play mid jungle on blue side, and then play the scaling, save AD carry, engage support, and then play a scaling top lane on red side. So Fengwu will stay the same in the second round as well.
I like the way that you put it where you have setters and solvers, because I do feel like historically in general, Flash Wolves have always sort of been setters, right? They have the super strong start, they have a really good idea of how they want to play out their game, and they always come up with, like, I loved watching Flash Wolves in the era of lane swaps, because they always had like really smart and really kind of unique approaches to them. So it's interesting that that's still the point, because I feel like after teams solved the meta, you got to an area where Flash Wolves couldn't really play out their mid to late game as well. A lot of times they got sort of thwarted by the meta where they couldn't play as many engage supports, or you had issues where their lane assignments weren't as well thought out at a certain point in the game. And at this point, I think that we see a slightly different Flash Wolves, and they have evolved since MSI. Would you agree?
I think definitely this Flash Wolves has been this Flash Wolves from MSI 2017, which is the Batty era, when Batty first joined the team as a rookie in Spring Split in 2017, and then they had this dip in summer because the meta was just really bad for them. They didn't have the top laner that was serviceable in the meta, and then they went to MSI, and then they came here as well. I think that they have grown as a team. They used to be this team that played only exclusively one style. I do think that they've come into this tournament prepared with at least 2 styles of play, so they can switch gears instead of going into the panic mode and say, okay, crap, people have figured us out. Yeah, it's day 4 of Worlds, and then people kind of know how to play against us now. But I'm still not sure, because it's like I said, the way that they review things, they just go back to the details, and this is one small change we make, and then we replay the same thing again. So in the matchup, if it's Flash versus G2, I'm not surprised if we see them. They probably would take away the Camille. They'll probably ban that out, because that's something that I mean, while they do make these small changes, they don't have that level of hubris where it's like, yeah, your Camille's gonna run over us again. But if they give one their carry top lane, and they're still on this clock where they have a split pushing side laner, I I still think that they go with the exact same dynamic in this case. It's only where when we start talking about the best of 5 series, or when we see maybe even say MMD come into play instead of Hanabi, where we start to see a change in strategy that Flash Boost can have. And let's not forget that Varus is still. I still think that Varus is Betty's strongest champion, and he hasn't played that yet.
Okay. I think that the Flash Wolves are definitely going to be an interesting team to follow. I think it'll be good to see them play more games throughout the World Championships, and I'd still expect them to get out of the group at the very least. So perhaps we'll move on to Group C a little bit and talk about the next team that is representing the LMS, the MAD team, and some of their games today as well as what they've played so far. So first, kind of what do you think? Do you feel like Mad Team has been playing a little bit more reserved than they would have domestically, or do you think it's about the same?
I think that I'm just watching the game against Liquid today. They always go for this 10-minute setup where the various time catch. This is their favorite team composition, right? TP AD carry with the time catch, and it's against a Shen as well. This is perfect for 10-minute lane swap towards the top side of the map, and we saw the Talia setting up for that as well. But I don't know why they didn't pull the trigger for that. They can do this delayed lane swap where they either go and attack the Shen or they go and take the Rift Herald immediately at 10 minutes. And think they could have been caught with their pants down. But somehow, I think that they felt it was a bit too risky. They felt that, yeah, we got a kill earlier in the bot lane. Maybe they wanted to stick to that. And I think that might have been the fear of it as well. And this is after all a team of very young players, and it's a team that is the first time on the international stage. So this is not a Flash rules where they can go back and say that, yeah, our mistake here was that we scrimmed with G2 too much, and they just come in here, they go 0-2 in 2 days. They come into the third day. If they lose this game, it's pretty much over for them, and the nerves are going to play a part. And I think it's also the format. What people underestimate is that we are so used to watching. In 1 week you play one game, 2 games, one match, or one best of three, or in the case of the LCS, you play two best of ones. And you've got 1 week, you've got 3-4 days to prepare for the next week of games. At Worlds and then at MSI, you play one game, you go back to the hotel, and then you have maybe 1-2 hours to review the game, to talk about things. You have one scrim block at night, if you can get a scrim block, if you're lucky enough to get a scrim block. I'm not surprised if MAD is not able. Yeah, the three LMS teams, they definitely can find a scrim block. So you go back to review the game for 1 or 2 hours, and then you have one scrim block. You go to sleep, you wake up, and then you're off to the venue again for the next day. It's a very grueling process, and it's something that's actually quite it catches people off guard. How fast paced and how little time you have to really sit down, figure things out. So for MAD, that might have played into it. They went up against KT, they got smacked. They went up against IG, they got smacked. And then, sorry, not IG, they went up against EDG, and they kind of went toe to toe with them. There's some takeaways from that. And then coming in here today against Team Liquid, they probably, I think they're just scared, because I was just so disappointed. That was something that MAD, at least according to Nelson, that they always do. They had a setup for it, delay lane swap against the Shen, and then suddenly the Shen can't TP to himself, and you get a hit. So, um, disappointing to see them not pull it off. It's just, I think today was a sad day for the LMS.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I don't think a lot of people rated Mad that highly. A lot of people even said, GRX are the better LMS team, and we'll talk a little bit about them in a bit. But I struggled a bit to see a lot going for LMS or the Mad team when I was reviewing their VODs. When I was just looking at, except for Kongyue, who I thought would be an interesting player or he'd be able to do something interesting. And overall, I don't think his pathing today in particular was that inspired. Like, some people were praising it, but I felt that, you are giving up bottom side control of the jungle almost entirely by starting red and doing the full clear there. So I have been really, I was really lukewarm on them, but what do you think I was overlooking from them? Like, what makes this team stand out? What are the positives for them?
I think that one thing that we have to realize is that if we cover the team tag, right, and look at the way that these teams play, that this team plays, right, and there's always this other team that always comes in as a second seed for the LMS, and there's always this team for the LMS that always ends up in the same group as EDG, and that's AHQ. And MAD is they used to be the B team for AHQ. Green Tea was the coach of AHQ, now is the coach of Mad Team, and we can see that spill over here as well. And for us, why we miss out on so many things, and people are always saying that, yeah, Westdoor, we have no idea why people play him and all that kind of stuff. Is that the way that this team, or at least I think Green Tea, thinks about the game, or we talk about the philosophy of macro in the LMS, right? And when we talk about macro, this is a very nebulous, it's a very ambiguous term. Nobody knows what macro means. I mean, that's the whole joke. It's macro side lanes, it's macro jungle padding. Um, in the LMS, as the caster fluid define it, a team good macro is defined by being able to make the correct decision. It's as simple as that. It's being able to select the good options. And in the LMS, there's this idea that good options come about from strong laning, and or and the way that AHQ would always plan for these kind of things is that they would look at the lanes, they look at the opponents that they're playing against, and then they'll match their lane tactics to think about how can we get leads in these areas. So a very good example of this was when they beat SKT, I think last year, when HQ beat SKT last year, and they had the Westlaw versus Faker thing, and they knew that if they picked Fizz here, Faker would pick Cassidy and do it one more time because Westlaw solo killed him the previous year as well. So they're looking at things like that instead of thinking about what is the macro strategy that we're trying to play. Are we going for 3 tanks and then the Kai'Sa on the back line? That's the way Flash rules and people like us think about the game. But for them, they're thinking about things from a player perspective. How can they get a lead here? Because if you can get a lead in lane, if you're winning all 3 lanes, you have good options in the game. And if you have nothing but good options, it doesn't matter which one you choose because you're only choosing good options.
Yeah, but there's always an optimal option. And I feel like they kind of sometimes miss that. And to an extent, I would say that they, at least for me, you see always like these kind of Ezreal Tom Kench lanes that they played so much domestically, things like this, where they went a little bit hard on going towards having like strong winning lanes or having lanes that at least can poke off a siege of some kind with the Ezreal Tom Kench and stuff like this. And they just kind of felt like if we take lanes in isolation and maybe we can win them, and maybe Uniboy is roaming a bit more and he's giving some pressure to the other sides of the map, but if we just kind of win the lanes slowly, then we win the game in that sense. But I think that like other teams are playing more together. They're playing more united and they're approaching this from an idea of like, okay, so this particular lane is our objective to get something around, and we're going to move that into vision so that we can transfer it to this lane. And I feel like there's a little bit of a disconnect when I see Mad play compared to some of the other teams at Worlds.
Yeah, I think that this is definitely one area that the Mad, they will have to look at the roles experience and then the compare it to the success that they had in the LMS, and then this is going to be a learning point for them. So I didn't have very high hopes for the LMS moving into this year just yet, because when I saw that it was MAD and GREX coming in, I would even say that this was a weaker list of representatives as compared to last year when they had AHQ and HK. I mean, I think MAD AHQ is the same philosophy but with weaker players. You didn't have Ziff in the top lane, you have Liang in the top lane, so it's same idea but weaker players. I didn't really expect much out of them, but there is hope in this case because there's when it comes to the LMS, there's always this narrative that the LMS has no talent and oh, China's taking Karsa, the LMS is doomed and stuff like that. But we're seeing Breeze, K, and all these people being promoted to the top. So even if you are not talking about, yeah, they don't have like these superstars and things like that, there is something right going here in terms of promoting academy teams. G-Rex was also another team that promoted recently, and you have all these players. And for those of people who don't know, Breeze and K are the Met and Deathly of the LMS. These 2 players, they used to play on this team called, I think it was either X Gamers or YE Spiders, and this is the bottom tier team. They will always be the gatekeepers of the LMS. They will always be there to make sure that the ECS teams couldn't promote. And now here they are at Worlds itself. And I think that this is going to be an experience. They're going to come here. They're going to realize that, okay, this is something that we didn't plan for. This is what Worlds looks like. You have to play one game, and then this is the 5 hours you have to kind of make changes and things like that. They'll get the experience. They'll go back to the LMS, and if they make it to Worlds next year, I think that they will have a much better showing. They'll be much better prepared, and things will definitely look better for them.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of an important thing to underline when you see the same players and the same teams coming back to Worlds representing LMS every year. The idea is there actually fresh talent coming in? And there was even more worry about that because we saw so many Korean imports at the start of the year. So it's good to see, even if maybe people aren't as high on them right now, that there are players like Breeze and K who could come back again in future years to represent the LMS and be seen as kind of more of the giants of their region. And I think that they really kind of need that at this point. So,
I mean, the LMS barely gets any coverage, and it is true at some points of time. I think there was a certain point of time where the LMS was really not a very strong region, but having access to the Korean server and being able to scrim in Asia and being part of the QQ group where they can find scrims with LPL and LSPL as well as the KRCS, it actually forces the LMS as a region to improve. And just simply by being able to play solo queue on the Korean server, you get players like Breeze, who I think at one point of time he was like 900 points on the Korean ladder, and
sure.
this was from my memory last year. I'm not sure. I haven't really been following his account this year.
Okay. So, yeah, that's, but in terms of their group, how do we look at Mad? Like when you looked at this group immediately, did you think, okay, they have no chance of getting out, and or have basically they performed better or worse than your expectations as well?
Well, I mean, when I did my pick'ems, I put them at the top of the group because you can't put KT first because you can never get excited about KT. And I looked at EDG. I thought that okay, this is beatable for Mad Team if they make a few changes. And we saw a very close match between MAD and EDG. And I thought that TL is a team, and I think the NALCS, they'll come into the national tournaments, and because that is like the LMS might be a weak region, but you can scrim with Korea. But the NALCS, if you're in a weak region, you can scrim with Brazil, maybe. So Team Liquid, the others from the MSI, where they came in cold to the tournament, and they would find it difficult to adapt to the meta itself, and especially because they scrimmed like only with Fnatic, so they had this small segment of meta, and I thought the MAD had a very real chance of being Team Liquid, and I think that the draft today had them on track to do it. That the tactics today, they had the tools to do it, but they just didn't pull the trigger, which was the disappointing part about the game today. So I did see them advancing over Team Liquid. I did see them going 50-50 with EDG trading one game each, and then don't get excited about KT. Suddenly MAD makes it off the group.
So
But
absolutely, KT are not making it out of this group, right? That's the real takeaway here is that KT are doomed. There's no hope whatsoever. Sure, they're starting out 3-0, but
yeah,
it's
that
just going to
3-0.
be down here from here. You know, it's over. All right. So that's now that we've completely discounted KT. What would you say that Mad are improving at least? Because I think that I'm seeing a little bit better team play from them. Even today, I would say that when Team Liquid were putting a lot of pressure on bot lane, they were moving from lanes to sort of like play more defensively around that regard. Not necessarily the most optimal action because then TL basically got a free dragon off of that and could continue their
I
advancement.
don't
But
know.
I felt like it was better for them. Like they were reacting a little bit better together at least. So
It felt like they were lost today actually. Like MAD, when they played against KT, they got smacked, but I thought that there was an idea behind that. When they played against EDG, yeah, this is the HQ philosophy of how to play the
yeah,
game.
it was a little bit
It
closer. Yeah, yeah.
So I actually felt that this was a dip in performance, and it's like I say, the G2 is a team that started out low, and then they're very good at learning. Whereas for MAD, I just think that this is a team that they're inexperienced, and the format is not very kind to them. So they're gonna come in here, they're gonna struggle, and how well do they recover from this? We have to see as the tournament goes on. But right now, they probably are having a team meeting. They're probably having a discussion and thinking about okay, how do we solve our problems? We're 0-3. Is there even talk about you know what? We're 0-3. It's time to go on holiday in Korea. Is that even on the cards for this team?
Yeah, so basically Team Liquid have won one game, EDG have won a couple. We've already accepted that TL will not perform at all, but excuse me, KT
80.
will not
Yeah.
perform at all. So who do you think gets out over between EDG and TL though? And or do you think that TL goes on a nosedive and Mad comes back and has the second time ever in the history of Worlds since Fnatic last year the O3 goes, 3-0, beats the tiebreakers, and walks away out of second.
I think MAD is done.
Okay.
They're playing for pride at this point. They're playing to show the world that um the LMS is not Team Flash Wolves, and then that's it. So they are going to be trying to steal the game of EDG. I still think that they can do that if their mental state is still in order, and I still think that they can beat Team Liquid in the second round.
So,
But who makes out of the group? It probably will be EDG, and then no one else, just EDG, because you
just
can't say that the other team makes out of
Of
the
course,
group.
of course. So, but yeah, so I think it's very possible that second round Mad will play the spoiler, and it'll be kind of it's possible that TL can take a game off of EDG, and then you have Mad wins against either TL or EDG, and that will determine kind of like the way the group goes. Potentially, I think that there's still a lot of potential for excitement in this group, and there could be some interesting things out of Mad, even though I'm not really high on them overall. So, but that leaves one last LMS team to talk about in Group D, and then we'll go over Group B just a little bit, and that is G-Rex. You said something a little bit earlier in the show where you felt like AHQ and HKA were stronger representatives for the LMS last year than Matt and G-Rex, but I don't know, people watched play-ins and thought that G-Rex was, maybe the most amazing second seed, third seed LMS team we've ever had outside of AHQ. I think one year was touted as better than Flash Wolves. So, what are your thoughts a bit on G-Rex?
So I'm gonna be clear about one thing first. Okay, the G-Rex that we're seeing in the group stages of Worlds, this is not the G-Rex that we are seeing in play-ins. We saw Baby play 2 games. And then today we saw Empty play a game. And to me, this looks like a team that they're in panic mode. This is a team that came in and they didn't really. They were like, yeah, if we make it through plans, that'll be great. And then they didn't really plan for what is the game plan in terms of how do we organize ourselves, how do we go about planning our training, how do we rotate players as we move into the group stages itself. And they played 2 games of Bebe. The team looked very lost. They changed it back to empty, and it's just all over the place right now. MAD, I said they were victim of the Worlds format. G-Rex even more so. I think that they are in very real danger of going 0-6. This is a team that started off summer split. They were losing and they had to lose for 4 weeks where they went 0-7 before they started to turn things around. You don't even have 1 week in Worlds. I mean, you used to have 2 weeks and now you have 1.5. So this is looking really really bad for G-Rex. Um, with HK was HK stronger than G-Rex? Now let's talk a little bit about planes and why I think that this is one of the peeves that I have when people talk about the narrative about third seed Taiwan versus Turkey. Fenerbahce is a different team from Supermassive. Whether Supermassive is stronger or not, we have to look at the way that they play the game. And the way that Supermassive plays, it's a significantly weaker version of, I would say, I would compare them to Flash Wolves, where they have this push out mid and jungle and then help the bot lane, but they don't have the same solid rock on the top side of the map, which is very much more exploitable. And their jungler is also nowhere on the same level as Mujin or Karsa, which is what the Flash Wolves have. When I was looking at the prep for MSI itself, and we were looking at, okay, we could draw Gambit, we could draw Supermassive. I was actually more afraid of drawing Gambit than Supermassive because we knew that Supermassive, they only attack the game in a few ways, and this is a team that will be easy to prepare for. And if you're solid players across the board, there's a very exploitable top lane for you to simply punch a hole through against Supermassive. But let's go back to HK versus Fenerbahce. Fenerbahce was a much more, I would say, slightly more well-rounded team as compared to Supermassive, which had a stronger bot lane, but in exchange they had a weaker top lane. And I think that why HK didn't do well, and this is what I gathered as well, was that the coaching staff made the decision that when we play in the best of ones, when we play in the playing stages, we would just play it safe and we're going to drop scaling. It didn't help that it was the Ardent Sensor meta as well. And so you ended up with 2 scaling team comms, hit the late game, and then we saw HK lose the Baron flip twice, and Fenerbahce suddenly were advancing over them. So you both go scaling, and then it's just a question of who smites the Baron. You flip a coin twice. And HK, the way they played was very similar to AHQ as well. You had Rivers in the top lane, you had Mission in the mid lane, Unify and Kailing were beasts in the bot lane as well. God Kwai, he transitioned from AD carry to jungle. He was playing very well in the second half of summer of 2017, and they had this very all press kind of style where they could just press you from the start of the game, snowball that into mid game lead, and then close that out. But they came to Worlds, they went to planes. Yeah, it's a BO1. Let's take it a little bit more slowly. We got to be more careful because it's a best of one. Suddenly, you're coin flipping over Baron, and now you're second place in the group. You have to play against Fnatic. So that was why I felt that HK was stronger, but they made a misread in the understanding of how should they have approached the game, and this is something that I think any team going into these international tournaments we have to learn it trial by fire. You go into it. I talk about the World's format being bad for MAD, it was bad for GREX, and HK was kind of a victim of that as well in that regard.
So what would you say kind of happened to HKA this year, as long as we're talking about them? Because I also thought that this team had a lot of talent on it, and that this would be a team that we could potentially see in the years coming forward, but they obviously didn't do as well this year around. What do you think were some of their issues?
Well, I'm not sure because like GX they made this run for the playing brackets just picking Urgot and everybody giving the Urgot to them. So and you have Urgot. We have seen how Urgot operates. If he gets the lead and he starts to be able to roam around the map, the Fear Beyond Death ultimate is it makes a snowball happen really really quickly, and people were just giving that over to them. The read on the meta was still in the air. I think the playoffs as well as the gauntlet run, it wasn't a gauntlet for them. It was a second
Right.
playoffs for the third LMS seed. It was at a very weird point of time. Nobody had a good idea of what the meta was, and especially because Flash Bruce is not playing in that, so you don't have the meta setter playing over there. So people are just picking their own things, and then you're running in parallel to one another. And to me, it felt that G-Rex so happened to have the, the better read on the meta game, and that's how they ended up in Worlds, and that's how they advanced over HK. I didn't really watch all that much LMS
Okay.
in the second half of summer, so I'm not exactly sure what happened to HK. But from what I heard, they imported Koreans as well. They're playing around Iksu, who was the former, was it Jinair?
Top
Jinair
lane.
top laner, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it was. Yeah, I think it was Jenner. It's been a while because he was hanging around in Korea, and then he was hanging around in the LPL for a while. So, yeah. Uh, now he's in Flushel, but I'm not 100% sure. But that sounds familiar. Yes.
So HK, I think I heard they were doing well with him. As to what exactly happened, I my assessment is didn't get the right read on the meta.
And obviously, a lot of people kind of expected had a lot of things to say about J Team, right? They placed third in the LMS, and they were in the final at the regional final, but lost to G-Rex, and G-Rex didn't even make playoffs, right, in summer. So J Team has always kind of been the will they or won't they team from in the LMS. From my perspective, they have Fofo, who always looks pretty good. You had this year, you had Firefox joining their coaching staff, and so for me, I was kind of like, and then they have Lil V, who has also been a bot laner that has gotten a lot of attention. Sarah, like a lot of very good players on the roster, but to me that I'm not quite sure what goes wrong with them. Like, what's your perspective on that team in general?
I'm not too familiar with J Team, especially in the 2017 season, because I the 2018 season, because I'm not really sure. And this is a team that's changed a lot from when I was still in the LMS in 2017. So I can't really comment on what went right or what went wrong with J Team. All I know is that Firefox joined the team, and then they started to improve, and they still didn't make it at the final hurdle. So that's about all I know.
All right. Well, that's basically all
Shall
that
we
we have for
shall we
G-Rex,
drop
but
the bomb on the viewers and tell them what happened to AHQ?
go for it. Go for it.
So for those of you wondering, oh, where's AHQ? Don't they play against EDG every year? AHQ they finished bottom of the table and had to play relegations
Yep.
in the summer split of LMS.
Yep.
So I think the region is a little bit in turmoil at the moment. Some people say that it's making the region weaker. I say that it's because infrastructure is catching up.
Okay.
HQ was notorious for being a player-run team. So to see a player-run team, I mean, they eventually brought on Domo, who started to coach the team, and things started to be changed. But I think that it removes kind of the limiter to allow for the region to progress.
I also think that probably the Korean imports had a big impact because whenever you have like sort of an influx of Korean imports into a region, it's a bit of a coin flip, right? As to whether like these players that you're not as familiar with will work out. They're just a lot of times people don't necessarily do a lot of research into the players. It's just like, oh, they're this guy's Korean and he's in the top of the ladder. And I'm not sure what the philosophy was with importing on various LMS teams, but I do think that that probably had a lot to do with some teams like excelling that very randomly when they weren't expected to, and then some teams struggling a lot more than historically you would think as well. So
I think I have a few things to say about that. So
okay,
I think it's like what you said. It's what the team's philosophy. So when HK they had the same idea as AHQ. If you have the way that Tabe saw things in 2017 was that if you were high ranked in solo queue, your ranking in solo queue is equivalent to the fitness of a player. So like a soccer player is able to run fast, or a football player he's able to
okay,
run fast. That would be the equivalent of a player being high ranked in solo queue. So if you have players who can just run faster than the opponent in general, it will create more opportunities. So that brings it back to the AHQ kind of idea, where if you have players who are just more competent across the board, you suddenly have a lot much better options. So that was the idea that they had, and then they brought in Riris, who
right.
was very strong in the top lane, and I think that that continued to have a certain influence as to why HK continued to bring on Koreans in 2018 as well. But I feel that some of the other LMS teams, it was kind of like an arms race kind of thing. They were
Yeah,
secured funding. It's like, what do we do with this funding? Koreans, and they didn't really know how to utilize them accordingly.
exactly.
And I think that this is a problem with China teams as well.
Yeah, that I think almost every region has gone through this, right? Like Europe has gone through it, NA has gone through it, and obviously LPL has, but now we're getting to this point where LMS were a little bit behind just because they didn't necessarily have as much access to the funding, and now they sort of have to learn this lesson as well and figure out like if they're going to import, how they're going to import, and what the best approach to that is. So that to me could mean that we see like a slight hump and then LMS come out better for it in the long run because they've sort of figured all this stuff out, but for now it probably will hurt their performance a little bit. So
I don't think it actually hurts them. The fact that MAD is here, and this is a team of only Taiwanese players.
right.
There are no Koreans on MAD. It's actually a
Mm-hmm.
very good sign for them.
Yeah, I think so as well, but that's still part of the learning process, right? Because the bigger orgs
Yeah, definitely.
will have to take that lesson, and hopefully we get like some really good, either really smartly imported rosters or really good Hong Kong and Taiwanese players. Because a lot of people say that there aren't isn't like a ton of talent on those servers compared to obviously like China, which is nearby, Korea, things like this, but there is still a lot of talent, and I think we see if you watch the LMS like more new exciting rookies like every year. So it'll be interesting to watch them going forward. But in the context of G-Rex's group, how do we feel that G-Rex has performed? Was it? Did you expect
Whew.
them? I guess the easiest question is, did you expect them to beat 100 Thieves?
I expected them to be 100 Thieves. I expected them to be competitive Fnatic, but at this point of time, I'm not expecting anything else from this team. And this is a team that they clearly have run into some internal issues. They're clearly in panic mode, and I would be glad for them if they went 1-1 with 100 Thieves and finished the group 1-5. But things definitely aren't looking good for them. At first, I had them, yeah, this maybe 1-1 with Fnatic. They might have a chance to steal a game of Fnatic. I don't see them beating IG, and maybe 2-0 against 100 Thieves. And that was my take on them. 2-0 against 100 Thieves, maybe 1-1 against Fnatic.
But like Matt, you didn't necessarily expect them to get out of the group, or did you?
I didn't expect them to get out of the group. I did see scenarios in which MET made it out of the group. I did not see scenarios in which GRX made it out of the group.
There you go. That makes sense. So would you say that everyone who says G-Rex is stronger than Mad is just wrong, or are they competitive teams in your mind?
I think it's a recency bias kind of thing
Okay.
where they see G-Rex and then it's like, oh, what are the last access to bots? Okay, we see G-Rex winning 3-0 over J Team. Okay, they look pretty good in that, and then their PK is like popping up on Urgon and all that kind of things. Yeah, they might be good. And then you watch MAD. What's the last known thing from MAD? They're getting smashed 3-0 by Flash Wolves. It looks dismal, and losses against Flash Wolves, they tend to make it always feels like the other team is not playing League of Legends at all. It's not fair to watch a team play against Statues and say that, yeah, this is how strong a team is, because they're always going to look like they're just drowning under the pressure that Flash was building.
Unless they're feeling charitable and letting you play against their B team. But besides that,
I mean, they even played MMD against Mad Team, so
yeah,
that
of
might be
course.
the reason why people say that, oh, MMD, they didn't even play Hanabi, it's MMD.
Okay, so basically we have both have no LMS teams except for Flash Wolves getting out. And looking across the groups, because Group B is the one that we haven't really discussed, if Flash Wolves gets a Group B opponent, how do you think that they'll fare against either RNG, Gen G, or feeling optimistic, Cloud9, Vitality? Because obviously second seed is wide open.
Ooh, I think Gen G would be. It really depends on how Gen G plays the second match against RNG, and I think that the loss to G2 would help Flash Wolves continue to adapt to the meta. I'm actually glad that they did take the loss. I'm not sure how glad I should be, but it's impetus for change, and it's impetus for Flash Wolves to not keep making the same mistakes where we're gonna keep doing the same thing and oh crap, we got figured out. So what's gonna happen? I think they're making the right changes. I do see them beating out Genji possibly. As it's really hard to say because it's like you really need to see what happens in the second round robin to get a better read on this. But I it's just hard to vote against Flash Rules right now. Uh, when it comes to Flash Rules against anybody except for RNG.
Flash Wolves and RNG is kind of an interesting thing to me because I had heard after watching the final and seeing Flash Wolves play like a really similar approach to kind of the 1-4 setup that I see RNG do, which is like always get pressure inside and then only slowly push up through mid. That's something that I
Yep.
don't see a lot of teams do, but I do see like I saw Flash Wolves doing it very consistently in a similar way to RNG, and then I heard from Nelson that they scrim each other a lot, which made a lot of sense to me. And then of course they come into this tournament with like both of them on the first day play Scion Talia comps, right? And try to play through the game like that. And I thought that that was it's a really interesting matchup in that sense because I think historically you wouldn't necessarily think of uh, teams that are royal teams like teams with UZI on them as teams that would be the best analog for Flash Wolves, but going into this tournament, they feel very similar and like they're playing going for similar competitions, similar ideas, and just it's really interesting to watch that comparison because obviously you don't have Betty who on the same level as UCI, but you have really kind of creative synergy between Maple and Sword Art that's making up for that to an extent. And RNG often put a lot of focus on getting a lead in mid so that they can get side lane pressure from either their top laner or their mid laner. And I think that has been something that they end up evolving to look similarly. But if they come up against each other, you would favor RNG then, right? Based on what you just said.
Well, I think it's hard to say because if we're gonna work off the premise that Uzi is better than Betty, then yeah, if Flash Rules does the same thing as RNG, Flash Rules would then within that logic, if you're gonna play around the AD carry, your opponent's AD carry is better. It might come down to who has side selection kind of thing because it determines who is able to get the better AD carry pick. Uh, Else it would be RNG favored. But I do think that if Flash Wolves they go into this and say that yeah, we don't think that Betty is better than Uzi, and they start to take on the role of the solvers instead of the continuing to be a setter, where they just run the same thing and okay, we're going to run the exact same team comp as RNG, and it comes down to who can execute better. And then we might see how much Flash Wolves has grown as a team, because this was my disappointment with them at MSI, where they went into the second stage, and I was actually talking to Refrain, uh, who was part of the coaching staff for Flash Wolves at MSI, and he was saying that when it comes to the playoffs against Kingzone, it comes down to who has a better understanding of the meta. And I felt that Flash Wolves, they changed up their playstyle quite a fair bit when they moved from the group stages to the playoff stages in MSI, and they didn't do that too well.
So, do you think they fixed their problems? And if so, are Flash Wolves going to win Worlds?
If they beat RNG, I do have to say that they will become the team that's slated to win Worlds. Else, at the moment, I'm hoping for a Flash Wolves RNG final. But I mean, it's kind of like the fatigue from everyone saying that, yeah, it's Korea versus Korea finals again. It will be really epic for Flash Wolves and RNG. They come in, and I think from a lot of people in the West, they're having RNG and KT. But I think that at the moment it looks to me like a four-horse race. There's Flash Wolves, there's KT, there's RNG, and I'm never a fan of the way IG plays, but the way that IG has been showing up so far, I think IG is this is a four-horse race at the moment.
So, are you kind of writing off Afrika and Gen G after the first round, or do you think that these teams can kind of like use the solver mentality that you talked about and become like really big forces, or did you just kind of from the beginning, even before the tournament started, didn't think that they were horses in the race at all?
It's hard. It's hard to put them off. Like if you ask me to make a call based on what I'm seeing at the moment, then I have to make that call, because it's not fair to say that, yeah, Samsung, they've solved things before, so therefore they will solve things again, and based on that they're gonna achieve Super Saiyan and win worlds. We It's not intellectually honest to do that. What I'm saying is that they're making changes. The changes aren't working, and for Africa, they made changes, which was to, and the changes are not improvements. They just went back to the very open, the very non-polarized play style, which is the Varus Tamkench, and then they carry top lane where you can attack either lane, which is what they're familiar with in the LCK. We're not seeing something new, and if that is what the trends are looking like at the moment, I don't think things are looking good for Africa. Maybe Genji might have something, but we have to see the second game they play against RNG, because I think that the first game against RNG, they're making the right decisions. It was an execution mistake. I do think that that should have been a Genji victory, but in the best of five, where RNG can make the adaptations as well, where RNG can pull out the LMS G cars, like kind of 1-2 punch. I'm not sure if they're even going to do that at all, and then it might be a different story, because at the moment you're making these one changes. It's like, okay, Camille at the moment, I think in terms of how do you beat Flashdose and RNG, on top of everybody's ideas about this, I pick Camille, right? So now moving forward, Flashdose and RNG, they need to pay a tax. They're going to ban Camille. And do you have anything else? At the moment, if the only solution is to pick Camille and to defend and let the Camille become a split push win condition, that's not enough. That's not enough to say that the meta has been solved. So I I'm not writing off Genji. I think Genji, they did something, it looked good. They're adding things to the how do we solve this problem board, but I think Africa, they're not doing that. So I would say, can you write them off? It's hard to write a Korean team off, but the trajectory for them, it's not looking good.
Okay, then you still have RNG as your favorites for Worlds. Then is what I'm inferring.
Yeah, I think RNG and KT, they're also adopting a similar playstyle as well. We're seeing a Korean team play Xin Zhao. They played Xin Zhao, and that is something that you don't really see Korean teams do. They would always prefer the Gragas. They would always prefer for the Olaf. Or in fact, they would love to play Zac and Sejuani, which was so interesting to me. It was IG who played Zac. I mean, Ning is
Yeah.
a Zac player, but it's the LPL team who's playing the Zac, and it's the LCK team who's playing the Xin Zhao. Where if you look at the trends and which region tends to pick these champions more, is the LPL. They love their Xin Zhao, and for the LCK, you tend to see more of the Zac, because you see a lot more Skarn and Sejuani there as well.
And of course, I would say that you have like for both of these teams, you have Haru, you have the Spirit, you have Ambition Haru, you have Spirit Mowgli, and you have different teams, different junglers playing different champions, I would say. And like the younger ones are probably more likely to play stuff like the Xin Zhao, like that. Whereas Spirit would rather kind of farm and Ambition would rather place his defensive wards. And you have those types of playstyles who I think give the LCK teams potentially more diversity than we've seen before. So I think that there's still a lot to go on for Afrika and Genji, and I think in the recent matches we have seen them adjusting a bit from what tripped them up at the start. But yeah, I would still have RNG as favorites to win the tournament right now. Thank you so much, Jensen. Do you have any final words?
I actually want to open a can of worms,
Okay, go
which
for it.
is in terms of ranking the regions, right? So for me, I come from the LMS, I come from the VCS, which is a region that people always just kind of shove to the bottom because nobody hears about them. There's barely any English coverage, and there's always this question of when we talked about GREX, when we talked about HK, did LMS deserve their third seed? Or in fact, I'm gonna add this as a second question: do you think that the VCS should get a second seed?
Yeah, this it's funny that you bring that up because I've actually been talking about this a little bit with people. Is that I think that like if you, I've talked to a couple of other analysts who are saying, okay, well if LMS third seed is not going to even get out of play in sometimes, if they're not going to be able to win any team games against Western team, like do they deserve a third seed? And if Flash Wolves roster changes even more next year from what it has this year, because we already have Carcel leaving, like there's no telling kind of what would happen to Flash Wolves going forward. Like what does the LMS become if that something like that were to occur? So basically for me it's if you don't give the third seed to the LMS, you either have to promote another kind of play-in type team or you have to give more seats to the VCS. And I don't necessarily think that that would be the worst idea. Like I think we've had very good performances out of Gigabyte Marines, out of EVOS, even to an extent. We had performances, like a good performance out of Phong Buffalo so far. Like I think that they've performed about to what I expected, which is for them to be able to show up against G2 at the very least. And I think that that is a discussion worth having, especially since both the VCS teams, like the Vietnamese and the LMS teams, used to be in GPL together, and like the Vietnam was always kind of in the middle. Like they could be good enough to be grouped in with the Taiwanese, but then they could also be, but they were at least definitively in my mind above a lot of the other GPL teams at the time, and now they have their own region. So I think it might be worth discussing like whether or not you just get a second Vietnamese seed and put that into play in over a third LMS seed, or as someone brought up, as Clement brought up last year, I think like the potential of even combining the two maybe at some point would be an interesting thing to explore. But I don't know how